What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, August 8th, 2018, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday. And a weekend of, well, actually starting tomorrow, dodging the hurricane, although it doesn't look like it's really going to affect us here on Oahu. But the Big Island is under a tropical storm warning right now here. So we've got a lot to talk about today. Let's get right on into it. First of all, a reminder, our third hour guest today is Alan Phillips. He's an attorney, and he's apparently being sued over the fact that he supports people who want to avoid vaccines for their children. And we're going to be talking with him about that. So the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phones when you call on in with your questions, comments, or opinions. All righty, now up in Afghanistan, a U.S. airstrike that was supposed to be hitting Taliban forces in the Azra district instead hit Afghan security forces, and 9 friendly troops were killed. I don't know why they call it friendly fire. It's really not all that friendly at all. But apparently the airstrike also wounded some 14 officers, and basically reported the strike came after Afghan officials were engaged in an hours-long battle with insurgents overnight. So that's a big whoopsie for the U.S. military. Turning on down to Syria, government forces are attacking militant supply lines in northern Hama and basically trying to cut off their supplies so that they run out of food and ammunition. But again, this is winding down. No casualties among pro-government forces. This is all but over. They're just cleaning out the last pockets of resistance here. Now, yesterday we were talking about how this Syrian rocket scientist was assassinated with a car bomb. Israel's denying involvement. The New York Times said it was the Mossad. And it turns out the source for the New York Times was an unnamed official from an unnamed intelligence agency who said Israel had notified the United States in advance that they were going to go ahead and do this here. Now, Israel's Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman is accusing Syria of planning to rebuild its army after the end of the Syrian war. Well, wouldn't that make sense? They've just been through a major war, and their war machine is worn out, drawn down. And after this 7-8 year war, they need to be prepared for larger scale conflict. It makes perfect sense that Syria would want to rebuild its forces, but Israel's trying to say it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. They don't need any weapons over there. And Lieberman is also saying Syria is not satisfied with taking control of all the Syrian territory, which underscores the fact that Israel is still concerned that Syria wants that Golan Heights back, especially all that oil and gas underneath it. So we'll see what's going to happen to that. Now, 10 years ago, there was this very short but costly war involving Georgia and Ossetia, that whole area. And the Russian Prime Minister is warning that if NATO admits Georgia, it could lead to a terrible conflict, because NATO is just trying to gobble up countries, getting closer and closer to the border with Russia. And the Western powers had assured Gorbachev, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, that NATO would stay within its eastern boundary, which at that time was Germany. So the Russians are getting very nervous about that. And apparently, following that, the State Department is now demanding Russia withdraw from Georgia's separatist region. And that's South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And the U.S. does not recognize the region's independence. The U.S. is in the business of not recognizing anybody's independence, like Crimea. So once again, tensions with Russia are ratcheting up, and the defense contractors are rubbing their hands together in glee and saying, oh yes, we got the Cold War back. We're going to get rich here. Speaking of NATO, they had another little whoopsie of their own. Apparently, there was a NATO air policing mission over Estonia, and one of the Spanish fighter jets fired a live missile near the Russian border. Now, it didn't hit anything, fortunately, but the Spanish pilots have been asked to basically sit out the rest of the mission. Estonia was not at all happy about the rocket being fired over their territory. I wonder where it did go and what happened when it hit the ground. Now, about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, I mentioned that Henry Kissinger is out there trying to reverse the original Cold War's policy of containment of using China to basically hold Russia in check, which was a big part of the Cold War policy. And now Kissinger's saying, we just need to do this in reverse. We will get close to Russia, have an alliance with them, and use them to keep China in check. But that's really an absurd proposition for a couple of reasons. One, relations with Russia right now are pretty bad. The world is a very, very different place. Russia and China are moving together, and the U.S. is a declining power with little to offer. Right now, the hostile American market is of little importance to Russia next to the opportunities offered by the booming Asian markets. The center of economic life on the globe has shifted to the east. We're not the center of the world any longer. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, this spat between Saudi Arabia and Canada, it's spiraling out of control, and I have to say I think Saudi Arabia is overreacting on this one. The issue is there's a Canadian rights activist who got arrested and thrown in jail. Canada demanded her back. Saudi Arabia denounced the interference in their domestic affairs. They cut off economic and diplomatic ties. Yesterday, they stopped flights between the two countries here. And this is really, getting out of hand. I mean, we could see thousands of Saudi students in Canada be relocated to other countries, which would be inconvenient for them here as we start the new school year. And another victim of this spat could be this pending agreement to sell $15 billion worth of Canadian light armored vehicles to Riyadh, which would be the biggest arms deal in Canada's history. So, again, I think Saudi Arabia has drastically overreacted on this. Now, turning on down to Israel and Palestine, essential services are basically at the edge of collapse in Gaza. Israel has once again banned the transfer of fuel into the occupied and blockaded territory. This is coming from the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And 2 hospitals, maybe more, will run completely out of fuel in less than 2 days. 40 of Gaza's 132 water and sanitation facilities only have enough fuel to last 1 or 2 days. And that means over 1 million Palestinians are at imminent risk of possible sewage overflow around the 41 main pumping stations. And all of this is deliberately designed and imposed on Gaza by Israel. Now, finally, somebody is taking notice because apparently Egypt is now allowing domestic gas into Gaza, and apparently they sent 250 tons of domestic gas to Gaza, and it's been a month since Israel shut down the crossing for goods and fuel. And apparently a Palestinian official told the Anadolu news agency that some 11 trucks of domestic gas entered Gaza through Salah al-Din Gate, located near the Rafah crossing. The Egyptian authorities are refusing to comment. They're not confirming it, they're not denying it, and I'm sure they're probably going to get a nasty phone call from Israel over this one. Now, as you know, Trump has been pushing this deal of the century on the people of Palestine, which basically says, we stood back and let Israel starve you to death. We're going to send in money now if you give up your desire for a right of return. But apparently the real plan going on, at least from Jared Kushner, goes way beyond that. And apparently somebody leaked some of these Kushner emails, and it shows that Kushner and Israel simply want the Palestinians to disappear. And basically they're trying to pull the plug on the primary aid organization providing help to Palestinian refugees and to convince surrounding Arab nations to make the Palestinian citizens. In other words, to simply push them out. Now, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East was established by the UN in 1949 with the help of the U.S. to provide relief for the Palestinians displaced from their homes following the establishment of Israel. However, 70 years later, most Palestinian people remain refugees, and the numbers have ballooned from around 700,000 to over 5 million. Of the original refugees, the ones who were actually there during the creation of Israel, only a few tens of thousands are still alive. But that appears to be the agenda. Israel just wants them gone. Israel wants Gaza back. Israel wants all of the West Bank. Israel never wanted a two-state solution. And that nation-state law makes it very clear that the one-state solution does not include non-Jews, whether they're Palestinian or Druze. But Israel has crossed a line, and it's starting to lose a lot of its support. A lot of American Jews are starting to say, this really is not making Israel look good. It's not making the Jewish people look good. And apparently, the Minnesota lawmaker Betty McCollum took to the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives, urging her colleagues to sign an unprecedented bill that would prohibit Israel from using U.S. military aid to imprison Palestinian children. Now, it sounds rather minor, but what it underscores is the fact that this is the beginning of the end of total bipartisan support for the state of Israel. They've gone too far. And people who are supporters of Israel, it's backfiring. So, getting on to Iran, the sanctions are in place. There's rioting in the streets. There are agent provocateurs trying to whip up a regime change like they did in 1953 and in 2009. But there's this interesting article that came on out from Zero Hedge that says there will be no peace in strengthening Iran sanctions. And they're saying basically Trump is out of options. Sanctions is all he's got left. That's why he's using them hither and yon. Because they've lost in Syria, and everybody knows that. The ramifications of that are immense. It's basically revealed the U.S. as a paper tiger incapable of imposing its will on a world which is recoiling from its dominance. Syria stood up and said, no more. And Putin's intervention in Syria was supported by all the same people that are in Trump's crosshairs today: China, Iran, and Hezbollah. And eventually Turkey realized the U.S. could not be trusted. Thank goodness for enlightenment. And so now they're being targeted for economic destruction as well. So basically sanctions are all they've got left. And according to this article, this actually signals the beginning of the end of U.S. influence in the region. It's starting to come apart. This whole regime change and conquer the Middle East oil countries was supposed to be over in 2008. That's 10 years ago. And the U.S. is still stuck in Afghanistan. They're still in Iraq. They've lost Syria. They're still stuck in Libya. They're working behind the scenes in Yemen. Remember, Bernie Sanders came on out and said the U.S. is militarily engaged in 76 countries around the world. Our military is spread way, way too thin. And the nation is bankrupt. The stockpiles are drawn down. The existing weapons are wearing out. The new weapons coming out from the military-industrial complex, for the most part, seem to be high-priced junk. Now, Turkey has announced they're going to continue buying natural gas from Iran despite the U.S. sanctions. So that makes Turkey, India, and China. And this signals something that I've been saying all along. All of these other countries are simply learning to get along without the United States. The United States is no longer the indispensable nation in the global scheme of things. Now, down in Venezuela, Maduro is hoping Trump won't permit assassination plots against foreign leaders. Well, Maduro needs to look at the history of the CIA and how many foreign leaders have been assassinated by the U.S. government. But apparently there is this newsman in Peru, James Bailey, who's claiming that the assassination attempt on Maduro was planned in Miami. And he's reporting, there's a video that's on the front page of what really happened. He's saying the drones were bought in Miami, shipped to Colombia, smuggled into Venezuela, and the explosives put on them were disguised as TV cameras to try and get close. And they were foiled by the anti-drone technology that they always have surrounding Maduro for just this kind of circumstance. And there were 2 drones. And when the drone pilots realized they could not get close to Maduro, one of the drones detonated in midair. That one was caught on video. The other one crashed into a building. So according to this Peruvian newsman, it was made in the U.S. Remember, we reported yesterday that the U.S. had dropped sanctions against Venezuelan oil because they didn't want the government of Venezuela blaming the United States for the coming crash. Although I think pretty much everybody understands the U.S. has been conducting economic warfare against Venezuela for a very, very, very long time. Another article, this one coming out of Sputnik News. Europe is now seeking to boost ties with Russia and Turkey apart from the U.S. And apparently Turkey is seeking to host a new Syria summit to which the U.S. will not be invited. And Turkish analysts are suggesting France and Germany are also interested in expanding ties with Russia and Turkey. So again, the world is learning to get along without the United States of America. Well, we'll just throw more sanctions on you. That's what we're going to do, by golly. We're going to sanction everybody. All they're doing is they're isolating the United States economically and politically from the rest of the world. That's what's happening here. We have a new commander of U.S. submarine forces. He basically took the job last Friday. Vice Admiral Charles A. Richard came on out and made an acceptance speech basically saying, we shall not fail. The U.S. Navy's new submarine, basically says he's ready to take on Russia and China. And he said, we're back in a world in the midst of major power competition, and in that competition, our strength undersea is a key advantage that we have. That will not change on my watch. What he's saying basically is we've got the Cold War back. Money, 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 money. So turning to the domestic politics here, I think it's safe to say at this point, Washington is gridlocked. And, you know, Trump is under unending assault from Congress, including members of his own party. The Democratic Party, if they win in November, they're going to block everything that he does until 2020. So a lot of people are saying he's got to get tough. He's got to put on those presidential brass knuckles. He's got to start acting like a president instead of like a real estate salesman. He's got to start being more like Teddy Roosevelt here. And the GOP and President Trump have got to do something about these tech giant social media platforms that are censoring conservative content, because they're doing it clearly in anticipation of the midterms, and they will continue to do it up to 2020. So more about that when we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And once again, we are standing in front of you with our hands outstretched. You can see from what's going on right now, the corporate media, the politicians, the vaccine industry, the GMO industry, they've declared war on the independent media. They don't like the fact that we are questioning the official propaganda. And they don't believe in the First Amendment. And it's a fight. it's a fist fight, and we need your help. So the postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to make a debit or credit card donation or to pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. So we're going to take a phone call now. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, first of all, I just want to say we gotta, if they cut off everything, communication, if I have to communicate in smoke signals, I'll do it before I listen or watch the mainstream media anymore. Okay. But anyway, last night I was on my way home. I was real late. I was driving real late. I was listening to Coast to Coast. With George Norrie.
Yes.
And he had had some Israeli on there. Avi something or another. This guy was all over the place. He was Israeli, but he's also one of these dual citizenships. He's also he says he's an American also. As far as I'm concerned, if you have got dual citizenship, you're an American, but that's just me. But anyway, he said he was giving all kinds of... Now, one thing he was doing, he was praising Putin, and he was praising... and then he started saying, kind of like praising Assad in one way, and saying Israel stays out of it and doesn't do anything, when in fact I know that Israel is not staying out of it. They've been helping the terrorists. They've been helping
yes.
the what do you call it? The Shia, not the Shiite, the Sunni Wahhabis.
Yes.
Are really most of the terrorists, Saudi type Wahhabis. So I mean, I don't know what this guy. The problem with Norrie though, he likes to say he's part of the he's not actually part of the he's alternate or independent. But Norrie is very, very milquetoast. He basically will have, whenever I listen to him, he's got people on. He won't challenge them or anything else, no matter what they're saying. One of the reasons I think, you know who John B. Wells is, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I think they kicked John B. Wells off the show, because Wells is very outspoken and a real patriot, and he's got his own show on the net now, I think, and he's got a show also on Saturday night on the radio. I can't get it on my local radio, but I can get it on the internet. So I think that's what happened, because this guy was just, he must be well known, because he seemed like, otherwise I doubt that he would have had him on. He was all over the place.
Was it Uri Avneri? Does that ring a bell?
Avi something. Okay. I think Avi. That was his first name. I forgot his last name. It's a Jewish sounding name, but I just forgot what it was. But this guy was all over the place. I mean, some of the things I thought were very good, but he's forgetting that Israel actually helped the worst type of scum, the worst type of terrorist. It's not. He just kind of left that out, and Norrie wasn't questioning him about it either, which that's par for course, I guess. Like I said, I've totally turned off the mainstream media. And by the way, I know you and Alex Jones have your differences, but we got to unite behind Jones.
No question.
Because this is an attack. This is an attack on all of us.
No question.
Right?
Yeah.
This is an attack on every kind of independent media, and I don't think it's only an attack on the right. I think it's also an attack on certain parts of the left, independent-minded people on the left who are also getting censored.
Well, there's a very clear bias, toward conservative points of view in all these filtering algorithms, and I'm unaware of any left-leaning websites that have been treated like this.
Well, I listen to sometimes in the morning. You got this guy on Sputnik News. You got Stranahan and Nixon. It's called Fault Line, and they get people on like Tim Black. And what's this other guy's name? Jamal something or another. And they're kind of towards the left, but independent left. They're not. They're more towards the Bernie Sanders type left. And they say they're they're not getting through. A lot of times they're getting censored, they're getting kicked off, then they'll take them back on. And Tim Black was on InfoWars not that long ago, a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
As a guest, even though him and Alex Jones are completely different in what they believe. And they're trying to hook on to this stuff about the Sandy hoax. And this just really gets me because it is so obvious that what they say happened in Sandy hoax didn't happen.
Okay, well, Mark, I'm going to have to put you on hold. Don't hang up. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Mark in North Carolina, and this whole issue of the lawsuit over Sandy Hook. Those of us in the independent media, we do have to be very careful about what we say, that we don't cross a line into defamation, libel, or slander. And as long as Wolfgang Halbig and Alex Jones are just saying, there's a problem with this line of evidence, this seems to be wrong, the school was closed and so forth, they're on safe ground. But if at some point one of them said these parents are lying, that's defamatory. So I don't know exactly what went down leading to this lawsuit, but again, it's an assault on anybody out there trying to tell the truth, whether it's about false flag attacks or vaccine safety or chemicals in food or GMOs. Now, I just got an email here from somebody saying the World Socialist website is being shadow banned by Google and others. So yeah, that would be a left-wing website being attacked. But the World Socialist website is also a truth-telling website. And again, I think there's a multiplicity of players in this attempt to shut down the independent media. And, everybody's got their reasons. The deep state wants to keep their corruption secret. Vaccine makers want to go on selling bad vaccines. Monsanto and the other GMO companies don't want people talking about glyphosate. And the government in general doesn't want their false flags and propaganda exposed. And corporate media just wants to get rid of the competition because independent media has taken a huge chunk of their audience away and their ad revenues, and they're not happy about that. Mark, are you there?
Hey, Mike?
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, as for Wolfgang, I just talked to him recently. I've talked to him every few weeks, and he puts his number out there, and he actually was sued already by Leonard Posner.
Yes.
Whose son was supposedly killed at Sandy hoax, and then he was again killed a couple of years later in Pakistan.
But Posner had to drop his lawsuit. When they went for discovery, and I forget exactly what was asked for. I think it was documentation that he actually lived near Sandy Hook, and at that point he dropped the lawsuit.
Well, of course, because he's a phony.
Yeah.
I mean, why? But you can't get this out of not only the mainstream media. A lot of the alternate media is even afraid. A lot of the independent media. I was listening to Jason Goodman.
Yep.
Yesterday on YouTube. He talks like I think every week to Larry Nichols.
I know who Larry Nichols is. Yes.
And Nichols was even criticizing Jones for going into that with Sandy hoax. I mean, but yet Wolfgang has just about proven the whole thing was a hoax.
Yes.
I don't know what the big deal is. I don't know why people don't. I understand mainstream media isn't going to do anything, but why even Jones almost runs from this now is beyond me. That if we could finally prove that this is a hoax, the whole house of cards of the deep state or the shadow government or whatever you want to call them goes from JFK right on to today. The whole thing goes. It would be blown out of the water. And
well,
like you said a couple of times.
First of all, two things you need to remember. Okay, the corporate media will never admit they took part in deceptions against the American people, even though that appears to be a big part of their business. And the government will never admit to this. So, as far as I'm concerned, Halbig proved his case. And I'm convinced. Same thing with Boston bombing. That was a setup. Just the backpacks alone are reasonable doubt that the Tsarnaev brothers were guilty of that. And
How about the guy that got in Orlando?
I'm sorry?
The FBI shot him in the back of the head. How about the guy, the Chechnyan that was killed and shot in the back of the head there by the FBI? And by the way, the FBI agent who shot him, there were like 5 agents or something, and they said, well, they feared for their life because he was an MMA fighter or something. Nonsense. 5 men should be able to, subdue one guy. I don't care how good of a fighter he is.
Especially with a bad leg.
Anyway,
the guy was injured, and he was shot just right through the crown of the head, like an execution. But I mean, right now, I'm especially with this move to try and go after the independent media any way they can. I'm sensing a huge amount of fear coming out of government, corporations, corporate media. They're very much afraid that the good times are pretty much over, and they're going to be coming after us, and they're going to be coming after us very hard. And as I said, the conservatives in this country had better stand up and take action, or they're going to be silenced. And Trump and the GOP Congress have from now until January, whatever it is, when the change of government takes place, to do something about this.
The thing about that Chechnyan that was murdered is that the FBI agent who actually did the shooting was from the Boston area, which is one of the most corrupt parts. It goes right back to Whitey Bulger of the FBI. And the thing is, he was a former Oakland cop who was dirty, a dirty cop. Since I've worked in law enforcement, I know what they did. They kicked it rather than, he probably had higher ups that he were going to be exposed, so they gave him an out. They gave him a disability pension and told him to get lost. All right?
Okay.
Yet the FBI hires this guy. Now, I know the kind of, scrutiny you get as far as a background check, security clearance, because to work in the federal government in any kind of a security type. Because when I was a correctional officer down in Texas, I wanted to work for Bell Helicopter instead because I got tired of the prison, and I wanted to work for Bell Helicopter in security. And I was also looking at Pantex, which manufactures and destroys nuclear bombs. And they had a very, very strict security clearance. I couldn't have. I had bad credit at the time. I was, I had a bankruptcy and bad credit, so I was told right away, forget it, ain't gonna happen. All right, at the interview. But yet, you get a guy like this, who probably, if I had to guess, was probably drug dealing in Oakland, and was dirty as they come. The FBI hires him, kind of like some of the other dirtbags that the FBI, as we see now in all this investigation, like Strout and others like that. So there's something wrong. There's something going on, and if this can be exposed, you know what I mean? You got the Sandy hoax, and you got, like you said, you got the Boston
we have
bombing.
Exposed it. That's why they're coming after us. Anyway, Mark, listen, need to let you go. Got a lot of news to do. We got a third-hour guest, and thank you for the phone call. So getting on back to the news here. We were talking about the necessity for Trump and the still GOP Congress to do something about this attack on conservatism on these social media platforms. Because according to Dr. Robert Epstein, Google helped shift 2 to 3 million votes to Hillary Clinton's favor back in 2016 with their biased search algorithms. Now, to me, that's election meddling. That's politicking. They're engaging in political activity. And I think there's an issue there. I mean, they constitute a monopoly. They constitute a trust. And I think there are already legal redresses. And some of these people are starting to stand up and say, yeah, this is absolutely unacceptable. It just flies in the face of the First Amendment. I love all these liberals who are out there on their still active social media accounts screaming about how, well, Facebook and Google and YouTube, they're all private companies and they can do whatever they want. These are the same liberals who went ballistic over a baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple. All right, now apparently, according to this report from 12160, the Senate Intelligence Committee wants Julian Assange to testify. And the Democratic lawmakers just went totally ballistic. They're moving to have Assange's asylum revoked immediately, although that's actually not up to them. That's up to the government of Ecuador. But what is fueling that fury? Well, Julian Assange's attorney, Jennifer Robinson, told ABC News that Assange has said the source of the leaked DNC emails was not the Russian state. Assange himself really dropped a hint. It was, in fact, Seth Rich. So if Julian Assange testifies before the Senate Intelligence Committee and just comes on out and says it wasn't Russia, it was Seth Rich, blows the whole lid off of that story and that scandal. And that's why they're panicking right now. Alrighty, now House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes was being interviewed by Sean Hannity and came on out and said that the Department of Justice has handed over to congressional investigators all the requested classified documents under subpoena. And he says they need to declassify the Carter Page FISA documents because the FBI withheld exculpatory evidence from the FISA judges. All right. Now, getting on back to Dianne Feinstein. When the story broke about the Chinese spy that worked for Feinstein for 20 years, for some reason, the San Francisco Chronicle reported that it was her driver. And it wasn't. Maybe they were just trying to say, oh, it's the driver, it's no big deal, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. But apparently, the spy was her former office director, Russell Lowe. And Lowe worked for 20 years in Feinstein's San Francisco office. He was a staff liaison to the Asian American community before leaving 5 years ago after the FBI informed Feinstein they were suspicious of his possible espionage activities. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, I think it was, why did the FBI inform Dianne Feinstein about the possible spy but not inform Donald Trump? Just something to think about there. Okay. District Judge Amit P. Mehta is upholding BuzzFeed's motion to compel the U.S. government to answer questions about that Christopher Steele dossier. Now, BuzzFeed published the dossier in January of 2017. At the time, it was supposed to prove collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia and contained allegations including the possibility that there was a video of Donald Trump and some prostitutes behaving icky. And the dossier's allegations were unverified, and it was just political opposition research. Now, one of the people named in that dossier, Alexei Gubarev, sued BuzzFeed for defamation because the dossier included a paragraph that falsely said his company, Webzilla, was plotting to breach the Democratic Party's cybersecurity. Now, BuzzFeed is claiming fair report privilege, which grants protection for news outlets publishing fair and accurate reports on government action. In other words, if you are fed a bad story, there's, absence of malice, obviously, and you're protected. So they want to find out more about that Christopher Steele dossier. It was a complete hoax. And it was paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. And Christopher Steele supposedly paid Russians for information. Now, there's Russian collusion, bought and paid for, dollar signs, ruble signs hanging all over it. But Mueller is, launching after Trump-Russia collusion. They've been pushing that story for a year and a half now without any single evidence on it. And now, of course, Mueller, to save face, is after Manafort for unrelated crimes and just trying to make it look like he's he's on his way. The danger, of course, is that he's got Manafort and Michael Cohen by the short and curlies, and he could literally convince them to lie about Donald Trump in exchange for staying out of prison. So it is incredibly corrupt. Now, speaking of Robert Mueller, apparently Robert Mueller met with the former Ukrainian president, Yanukovych, at the same time Manafort was lobbying for him. Now, Mueller had tried to distance himself from that, but apparently photographs have surfaced of Mueller meeting with Yanukovych. So that's a bit of an embarrassment for him. Now, Rick Gates has testified that Manafort worked to help Ukraine enter the EU. And that, of course, was the whole point of that US-backed coup d'etat in Kiev that took out Yanukovych and put in Poroshenko, because Yanukovych wanted to merge with the Russian republics. It looked better to him than merging with the EU. And looking at the EU today, as it is, economically and immigration-wise, Yanukovych was being remarkably prescient. So apparently Manafort was working to help Ukraine get into the EU, which, again, that was the whole point of that war here. All righty. The corruptions are just racking up here. A story coming out of the Daily Mail. Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is accused of improperly siphoning $120 million from his business partners. Apparently this guy is so cheap, he even takes the sweet and low packets from restaurants home with him to save cash. And apparently he's been accused by one former colleague of being a pathological liar. Boy, Trump sure knows how to pick them, doesn't he? Meanwhile, up in New York, Congressman Chris Collins is charged with insider trading. Now, the corporate media has been giving that a lot of coverage. And Chris Collins was one of Trump's earliest and most vocal supporters. He's been charged with insider trading, accused of basically tipping off his son and others to sell stock in an Australian pharmaceutical company before the results of one of its failed drug tests became public. And yes, that is insider trading. Now, apparently, Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh has now met privately with almost every Republican senator, and it looks like he's got a lot of support. Now, he's going to be opposed by the Democrats, but his confirmation is going to be this fall before the end of this term of Congress, and so he's probably going to get on through. I don't like his stance on surveillance on Americans and the Fourth Amendment, but we'll just deal with that when it comes. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and perhaps illustrating the decline of the U.S. Congress. I once again turn to Hawaii's own Senator Mazie Hirono, and fresh off of her basically being caught not knowing that it's already illegal to come into this country without the proper paperwork. Apparently, she has decided that those nominated to become federal judges should be quizzed about their sex lives, but only the male judges. Now, that's pretty darn sleazy there. Okay, now, a little bit of good news for those of us who are worried about election integrity. A lot of people don't know this, but back in 1982, there was a lawsuit between the Republican and Democratic Party over perceived Republican Party vote suppression, which ended with what was called the consent decree, which literally prohibited the GOP from contesting elections due to suspected vote fraud without the consent of the Democratic Party, which was, of course, never forthcoming. Well, finally, 36 years later, a judge has ended the agreement, freeing the Republican Party to ensure election integrity by investigating and pursuing suspected vote fraud. And boy, is there a lot of it already. And we're going to take a phone call, then we're going to come back to this here. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. I have a China and Apple question. I seen yesterday, maybe it was yesterday, someday this week, I don't remember, about how China was holding Apple hostage. I think was the headline on Drudge.
Well,
my question is.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well,
I want to hear what you have to say.
Apple and a lot of other American manufacturers could be caught in this tariffs war, and China might use them as a bargaining chip. But go ahead and ask your question.
My question is, since it's state-run, Chinese state-run, could they or would they just shut everybody off that has an Apple phone, an iPhone?
Yeah, well, yes, in theory it can be done. We've already seen here in the U.S. Where communications are deliberately turned off. What was the one over in this country where there were riots going on and they shut down all the mobile internet services? So it obviously is built into the system. I don't know why China would punish the owners of the Apple products. But I think that would be counterproductive for the Chinese government to do. I think China needs to keep this on a government-to-government level. But again, as I said, Apple and a lot of other American companies that manufacture in China could get caught in the crossfire. Now, a lot of people don't understand that because Apple does make their products in China, when they're brought back to the United States, they still have to pay the tariffs. So the prices on all of these things are about to go up.
Did not know that. Thank you for clarifying that. I was just looking at it at an angle. If China was going to invade, that would be a way to stop communications, would be shut all the phones down.
Well, that's civilian communication, not military communication. Anyway, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking about the issue of election fraud, of which there seems to be a great deal. And fortunately for the Republicans, a judge has now ended the so-called consent decree, where the GOP literally had to ask the Democrats for permission to investigate allegations of election fraud. And it was an absurd deal. It was basically a license for the Democrats to steal votes, unchallenged here. And now there's a lot to investigate. Down in Georgia's primary, a federal lawsuit has been filed over irregularities there. For example, Habersham County's Mud Creek precinct had 276 registered voters, but some 670 ballots were cast, according to the Georgia Secretary of State's office. But yesterday, magically, the number of registered voters on the Secretary of State's website was changed from Mud Creek to 3,704 registered voters. And in addition, there have been election security activists, a lot of sworn statements and exhibits from activists who experienced a series of bizarre and confusing issues at the state's polling places. Some Oakland County precincts ran out of ballots. Now, you know how many registered voters there are in the precinct. Why is it so hard to not have enough ballots? Over in Detroit, voters say they were not notified of polling place changes. Now, right now, the Democrats have launched a new voter registration drive for inmates at Rikers Island. And they basically are going into the prison with voter registration paperwork and absentee ballots for those who've been incarcerated but have not been convicted of a felony. If you're convicted of a felony, you lose your right to vote. And basically, it's estimated that 75% of the inmate population on Rikers would be eligible to vote thanks to this program. That's roughly 6,000 votes right there. So here we have the Democrats, the party of crooks and illegal immigrants. And boy, they must be getting desperate here. All right, let's take another phone call. James in Charlotte, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, how are you doing? Just a few minutes ago, you were talking about the situation that we all know has been the case of Mueller doing everything he can to squeeze and break Paul Manafort into giving up information, incriminating information, if in fact he has any, on Donald Trump, or in fact to go even further and to create incriminating information. What I was thinking, I obviously don't have any idea of whether this is the case, but I would think it would be a strong possibility that Manafort might in fact have an ace in the hole, and that Trump may have, through Manafort's lawyer, relayed to him that if he is convicted, that Trump will pardon him, which would basically take the pressure off of him having to give up information or to create information.
That would be a really, really good idea for Trump to do, and he's also going to have to do it for Michael Cohen, because Mueller has Michael Cohen now by the short and curlies.
Yeah, that's also true. I mean, obviously, we can't know if that is a fact, but obviously, if I were in Trump's shoes, I would certainly, use that strategy to make sure that they knew. I mean, there's all kinds of grounds for a pardon. I mean, I had heard a couple of lawyers talking about how incredibly over the top this prosecution by Manafort is. He's facing 304 years in prison.
Yes.
And I think the average sentence for a case like his, even cases that are significantly worse than his, is just a few years in prison and maybe a fine. And so, I mean, the prosecution is just so obscenely over the top and obviously directed at ulterior motives.
Yeah, very clearly. And you're absolutely right. The real danger here is that Mueller's going to be able to convince Manafort and Cohen to just fabricate something against Donald Trump, because if there was any actual evidence of Russian collusion out there, they would have found it long before now. It's just not there. And apparently Trump's lawyers, Fox is reporting that Trump's lawyers have responded to Mueller's request for a face-to-face session with the president. Oddly enough, they're not saying what that response is, from which I would take a guess that they're saying no, unless there are strict controls on what is going to be asked.
Oh, absolutely. I certainly wouldn't go into a battalion of lawyers without any controls over. In fact, I wouldn't do it under any circumstances.
Well, anything else?
No, that's all. I just thought I'd mention that to you.
Yeah, thanks an awful lot, and we'll let you go here. And yeah, that would be a way that Trump could pull the rug out from under Mueller, is just signal to Manafort and Cohen that they'll get an immediate presidential pardon. Now, it doesn't make up for all the money they're going to lose going through that whole trial procedure, but it would be a good idea. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our Honor affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Obviously talking about the recent primaries, and apparently the ultra-progressive Democrats, for the most part, failed to unseat the incumbent Democrats. So the blue wave is looking more and more questionable here. Most of the candidates endorsed by Ocasio-Cortez lost. So already she's starting to look less and less like the Democratic Party's new golden girl. Apparently, the Troy Balderson, who is backed by Donald Trump, won the Ohio special election. And already the Democrats are out there saying, oh, it was the Russians. It was the Russians. You know, all those Green Party voters who basically took votes away from our person, they're agents of the Ruskies. Talking about kicking a dead horse on that one here. Here's a little bit of good news. Russia Today has received an Emmy nomination for their reports on war-ravaged Mosul. And this is their 6th International Emmy Award nomination. And good for them. Good for them. Now, The other day we were talking about the fact that the ultra-liberals out in West Hollywood voted to remove Donald Trump's star from the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And I chimed on in, what about Kevin Spacey, who's got no less than 6 separate investigations for sexual assault against him right now? And somebody wrote on in to say, well, what about Bill Cosby? Why does he still have his star? And I mean, I think it's a good thing that they took Bill Clinton off the Democratic fundraising because, I mean, his treatment of women makes Trump look like a choir boy. Now, as we reported yesterday, following last weekend's riots, the Berkeley Police Department posted the mugshots online on their Twitter feed, something that they do as a matter of course, and Antifa is freaking out now. And you know, the Berkeley Police Department is not backing down. Their spokesman, Byron White, said these people are coming from out of town, they're bringing weapons, and they're committed to violence. We don't want people to be able to do that with anonymity. Well, that's exactly what Antifa wants. They wear facial masks. They don't want you to know who they are. And it was a serious, severe situation. And the Berkeley police are right. These Antifa came from out of town. They don't live there. It's not their community. They're being brought in to cause a ruckus. Turning to the economic news now, Trump is going to slap another $16 billion in tariffs on Chinese imports starting August 23rd. This will, of course, cause China to retaliate against more American products. Now, Trump came on out with a supposed poll that 71% of American businessmen support the Chinese tariffs. I have to tell you, I'm having a trouble with that one. I'm sure that there are some American businessmen who are making products that compete with Chinese products are in favor of this, but our manufacturing base hasn't been built up to the point where there are enough of these manufacturers who are making domestic versions of Chinese products. That's going to take a while. It took 30 years for our manufacturing to decline. It's not going to be rebuilt overnight. Okay, we're going to take a phone call from Leila in Ontario. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'm sorry I'm calling in again today. I had not intended to, but the discussion of the right of return.
Yes.
I am claiming publicly that I do not, under any circumstance, authorize anyone to give away my right to return to my hometown. I was born in Bethlehem, July 12, 1945. I am the daughter of Zurbi Babish from the Hamula or tribes of Salama and Lama, and I do not give up my right of return. Nobody has the right to do that in my name or anyone else's name. Forgive my shaking voice, but I'm just so angry. I've lived a whole lifetime knowing that my identity was stolen. It's basically identity theft. We are the true people. If the Bible is based on any facts, and it's probably based on legitimate legends throughout the region, that even the name, forgive me, but this, I'm now 73 years old. I just turned 73 on July 12th. And I have waited an entire lifetime for the right to return to my homeland so that I could retire there. When retirement became out of the question, and my son asked me, what do you want me to do with your remains when you die? I said, if I die in Canada, burn me, cremate me, and flush me down the toilet, I don't give a damn. If I survive, and you can help me, I want to go back and die and be buried in the soil of my ancestors. That is not just a piece of dirt that people have been fighting over. It is the place where the highest of morals, the ideals of the human spirit and its capabilities at its best originated and were promulgated by more than just the Mashiach, be it Jesus or any of the others. There were many others before him and after him, and even Prophet Muhammad. I wonder if he was not trying to perfect Judaism, because if you look at Islam, it has many of the similarities of Judaism. except the one thing that he says is Allahu Akbar. God is the greatest, meaning that all those heretical Jews who were still worshiping multiple idols, be they within the land of Canaan, which to the Akkadians was known as Kenananu, meaning the land of the red, and all of those people, I believe that even Prophet Muhammad was only trying to perfect the people who had gone astray. So, again, if anyone around the world can hear this message and you have any sympathies or beliefs in the right of a person, an inalienable right, please speak to your legislators if they are human and tell them that the few surviving Palestinians do not willingly give up their right of return, and Mahmoud Abbas does not have the right to do it, and no one else has the right to do it on his behalf. And neither does Hananiah in Gaza, who probably, I question his total fidelity. But again, all of them, and Mursi, no, it's not Mursi anymore, it's Al-Sisi in Egypt. Yes. All of you. Assad Bashar al-Assad, thank you for standing up for the Christians for all the years that you protected the Christians, because the Arameans that survived were mainly in Malouala in Syria, but they've now been scattered. So for all of those who have defended Christians or anybody who was born in Palestine, please continue to defend the right of return for the few of us who remain. And as for this King David, David was not a Jew. Who was Ruth? She was a Moabite. And the mother of Solomon was the wife of a Hittite. A Jew would not have married a Hittite, even though David contrived for her murder. So Judaism itself never really had a claim to that land. It was a land that belonged to all the people of the world. And as for the Saudis, if I may for a moment, please stray just a little further. Anyone who owns a piece of land only owns land to a certain depth. All the oil that is located in the Middle East does not necessarily belong to the people who today live on the land under which that oil, the center of the earth is very dynamic. I mean, those oil reserves perhaps have moved back and forth, and natural gas reserves. It doesn't belong to the Saudis, who are profoundly evil, and they used to, there was a time when they would not allow anyone who was not a Saudi to even sit down at a table in a restaurant. It was the Saudis first, and all foreigners could sit after the Saudis were gone. That is how specially they once treated their people. As for the light armored vehicles that are being sold by Canada to Saudi Arabia, GDLS, General Dynamic Land Systems, its headquarters is in Michigan. How has Michigan profited from it? That $15 billion will never come back to the City of London and its taxpayers. The only ones who will benefit are the people who work at GDLS, and those light armored vehicles are needed to help the bombers find their targets. So GDLS employees, you're just as guilty, you're complicit for the few dollars you take home today. And anyway, I'd better stop there. Basically, what I wanted to say is no one can take away my right of return, except God, when he decides that my time, or it decides that my time is done and I can die, wherever that may be. Well, but anyway, thank you for this.
I'm already getting emails from people who are very supportive of you, and it is rather unfortunate what's being done to the Palestinian people. And as I mentioned before, it appears that the real ultimate plan is not just to get them to surrender their right of return, but to literally expel them from Gaza and the West Bank into the neighboring Arab countries. Anyway, Layla, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go.
Michael, just one.
Yeah, go ahead.
One quick comment, please.
Go ahead.
You know how Israel has always claimed the Arabs wanted to push Israel into the sea?
Yep.
It's the opposite.
Of course
Israel wants to push all the Palestinians into the sea. That's my last word. Thank you, Michael, for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. And yes, I have this article, Israel and Palestine, the maps tell the story, that make it very obvious who is trying to push who off the map. Okay, we're going to start with Dustin in New Jersey. Dustin, I'm probably going to have to take you through the next commercial break, and what's on your mind?
She's right on, Mike.
Yep.
Man, she's got a lot of knowledge behind her, man, and you do too. But I mean, isn't it amazing how we're all fighting? Well, we're not all fighting, but they got us all fighting with each other. These select few small group of people. How can a small group, Mike, just control everybody? Doesn't anybody have critical thinking skills anymore? You know what I mean? Like, we are the majority of the population of the world. They are the minority.
What do you mean
I don't care what armies they got.
We?
Well, we the people, Mike. Just we the people in the world. Just the average working person or person who's not doing any of this crap.
Well,
you look at the Congress and the Senate, Mike. They're garbage. I mean,
you need to understand, rulers have had 8,000 years to perfect the art of ruling, and yes, it gets updated as technologies and social models change. But yeah, they're good at it because of a lot of practice throughout history. Anyway, we got to take a break for commercials. Dustin, don't go away. I'm going to come right back to you after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Dustin from New Jersey. And Dustin, I think we all need to understand that the people who are in positions of power have a very different mentality than the rest of us. And they don't think like us. They don't feel like us. They're totally focused on themselves and their own continued wealth and power. And they're oblivious to the harm they cause around them.
Just look at Syria, what they caused, Mike.
Yes.
My God, you know how long it's going to take to rebuild? That was considered the Rivero of the Middle East, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was a beautiful place. I mean, you go to any of these countries where the U.S. has gone in, like, for example, Iraq, and you go back and you find photos from before the U.S. intervention or war or whatever you want to call it, and they're beautiful places. And you look at it today, and it's just all rubble and holes in the buildings. In fact, there's a photographer in Syria who basically found a whole bunch of pre-war pictures, and he went back to the same exact locations and took another picture. And he set up this little page where you could sort of swipe back and forth and see the difference. It's a huge amount of destruction. But the people who are responsible for that destruction, it's just the cost of doing business. So many people dead, it's not really a problem. As long as we get the oil pipeline right of way, or we get the oil sold for the U.S. dollars, or we again prove how macho and butch we are to the rest of the world.
Yeah, so much for we care about the children, we care about the people, we care about democracy, all lies and crap. Hey, Mike, Iraq was the most literate. They had the highest literacy of all the Middle East countries. But yeah, isn't it amazing how Saudi Arabia is still there? They got that crap going on with Canada now, showing a picture of a plane flying near the Toronto tallest building or whatever.
The CN Tower. The CN Tower. Now, Saudi Arabia changed the graphic, and they actually did apologize for that. But I still think their reaction to this whole incident is way, way, way overblown. And the reason Saudi Arabia is still there is because Saudi Arabia is very obedient to the United States in the region. And that's really what it comes down to. If you do what the U.S. says, you're left alone. If you don't do what the U.S. says, bad things happen to you.
And petrodollar.
Yeah, and the petrodollar.
Petro one coming up fast, Mike.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And they ain't going to stop that. And isn't it funny, like you were talking about Henry Kissinger before, it's too late. I mean, where are these people? Like, these people are a year, behind. The Russia's not going to team up with the U.S. That dream is long gone.
Yeah.
I mean, come on now. Look at what we demonize them. Even the 2020 elections, did you know the Russians are, involved in trying to disrupt the 2020 elections, they said. I mean, it's only 2018, so it's all BS with this crap because it's going to keep going on and on.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, as the U.S. declines and the government and corporate media lose influence, their lies are getting more and more outrageous. Again, we're caught in this cycle where now all they've got left is to try and shut down the independent media and sanction everybody in the world to do what the U.S. wants them to do. But again, that whole sanctions policy is based on this outdated idea that the U.S. is indispensable to the rest of the world, and that's simply not true. We don't manufacture all that much of anything anybody else wants. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And the world is reorganizing to basically operate without the United States.
And Mike, did you hear about the British? They had the Americans weld the torpedo tubes on their nuclear subs, and the welding was all wrong. They messed up the whole welding, so they got to delay the subs launch for like a while yet until they fix all the problems. Geez, can't we even weld like some torpedo tubes? I mean, my God.
Well, obviously, welding on a submarine has to be done absolutely right, or the sub could spring a leak and sink. That's what happened to the Thresher. They tried to save money by brazing the joints on some of these cold water pipes, and the brazing failed, and they lost the submarine.
And Mike, did you see that new Russian? Was it the Queen Elizabeth? I forgot what's the new aircraft carrier with the two control towers?
I'm not up to date on that one. I'll have to take a look.
Yeah, it was using Windows, or I think they were using Windows XP still on their computer system. But that's the first. If they mess around with Russia, and that's the first target to get hit. My God, are these people like still living in like? Aircraft carriers are a thing of the past. My God, smaller boats with anti-ship and high-speed hypersonic weapons is the future. You can build a smaller ship that'll take out an aircraft carrier that's like a quarter of its size. It's just a floating coffin, Mike. At this point,
Yes.
I mean, that's all I got to say, Mike. Have
all
a good
right.
show.
Well, we're going to let you go here. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economic news around the world. And it's now been 4 years since Russia placed an embargo on Western food in response to sanctions. And the EU is basically looking at all the revenue they lost. And basically, back on August 7th, 2014, Russia imposed a food embargo on countries that adopted sanctions against Moscow over Crimea's reunification with Russia. And the food embargo banned the imports of meat, fish, and seafood, vegetables, fruit, and dairy products from the EU countries, the U.S., and several other states. And the ban has recently been prolonged until the end of 2019. So again, George Soros has to be looking at this and realizing this is a big threat to his new world order. Because all of the national economies are starting to unlink. And countries are starting to go back to domestic production of their needs for a domestic market. Now, the EU has come on out and announced it will punish European companies if they comply with U.S. sanctions on Iran. Europe is not going along with it this time, another sign of declining U.S. influence in that part of the world here. So, article coming out of Mint Press News asking very simply, as Trump takes his sanctions battle to Europe, who's more isolated, Iran or the United States? So I'm not the only one realizing that this fiscal policy, the sanctions policy, is isolating the United States economically and politically, and that's going to end badly for the United States. There was a time when the United States was indispensable because it made itself so at the end of World War II with the Bretton Woods Agreement. And once they were indispensable, once all commerce had to go through the U.S. dollar, boy, they had a real good time, but those days are long gone. The US dollar is not king anymore. It has rivals in the yuan, in the ruble, in other currencies around the world. Now, another article that came out of Fort Russ is asking, will Iran and North Korea team up against the U.S. sanctions? Will North Korea start importing oil from Iran? Or will North Korea sell things to Iran that Iran cannot get anywhere else? Or they could sell, basically, the oil could go through China into North Korea. Now, everyone's talking about the price of oil is going up because of all the sanctions nonsense here. Global oil demand is only 1.5% higher this year than it was last year. But crude oil price is up 100%, meaning it has doubled. Over in Great Britain, Homebase plans to close 60 stores, threatening more than 1,000 jobs. Now, Homebase is sort of the British equivalent of Home Depot here in the United States. It's for do-it-yourselfers. But again, as the economy continues to fail and more money is taken out of the pockets of ordinary people to feed the war machine, to feed Israel, to take care of the refugees, people don't have the money for home improvement. And so the home improvement stores are going out of business. And their supply chains, their manufacturers, it's going to work its way up. Article came out from the Boston Globe. Are there too many restaurants in Boston and not enough diners? Which is kind of a roundabout way of saying that Boston is going through a crisis in their restaurant industry. And apparently one of their higher-end restaurants, Les Sablons in Harvard Square, shut last week after just over a year in business. So, and again, people aren't eating out as much as they used to. Now, Warner Music is doing quite well. They're basically awash in cash, thanks largely to complete liquidation of its Spotify shares, totaling $504 million. Now, Spotify is still dealing with a couple of class action lawsuits, and in one of them, Claire's actually part of the class. Apparently, Spotify was using some of her music without permission. But the economy is in bad shape here, and new research is showing, this is research from TD Bank, reveals that 1/3 of married couples fight over cash at least once a month. And that's always a source of domestic discord, money, or sex. Now, turning to the immigration refugee situation. Apparently up in Stockholm, they were constructing a new police station in the no-go zone of Rinkeby, and it was attacked by masked offenders in a fiery siege. Apparently, a car containing low-grade explosives was used to ram the gates of the station and then set on fire by its occupants, who were also throwing stones and fireworks at responding firemen and officers. Now, let's see. I'm getting on down here because there was more about Sweden here. 200 people posing as security threats, or 200 people who pose a security threat, have been allowed to enter Sweden around the, amid the migration crisis. And now they're issuing a red alarm over the Stockholm Metro becoming a no-go zone for personnel. Now, the Swedish politicians are out there denying the existence of the no-go zones, but 4 stations in Stockholm Metro have become so dangerous for personnel, they're only able to go in there with a police guard. And a local guard admitted to just simply being outnumbered and being pelted with stones. So as of today, 4 stations in Stockholm Metro, Rinkeby, Tensta, Rissne, and Hjulsta, are all marked with a code symbolizing the highest danger. This according to the Swedish daily newspaper Svenska Dagbladet. Now, there's a new political party in Sweden. It's called the Alternative for Sweden Party, and they're out there screaming about destructive multiculturalism, and they're saying that if they can take control of Sweden, they're promising mass deportations. They're going to reconsider the bulk of citizenships and residence permits granted to these immigrants from the 2000s onwards, and they're talking about sending back hundreds of thousands of immigrants in a matter of several years. And again, back in Sweden, part of Sweden's third largest city, are so dangerous, the postal service won't go there. People have to come down to the post office and bring up and pick up their mail here. Over in Germany, their head of intelligence, Hans-Georg Maassen, is saying that Islamist children pose a real threat to Germany, saying that there are signs of radicalization of minors and young adults. It's happening faster and earlier. Over in Great Britain, 3 men who were part of this Rochdale child sex gang have been stripped of British citizenship and will now be booted out of the country. Now, these were 3 taxi drivers. They're dual Pakistani British citizens. Abdul Aziz, Adil Khan, and Abdul Rauf. And they were among 9 men jailed over these appalling crimes against girls in Greater Manchester in 2012. Over in France, in Val d'Oise, just north of the no-go heavily migrant population of Saint-Denis, there had been brutal attacks where this woman was being assaulted, and a man basically tried to defend his wife, and he got beaten to a pulp by these 6 youths. The crime there is so bad that one guy had his gold teeth ripped out by thieves in the same area last month. Back in Britain, an asylum seeker was arrested for raping a student in a cemetery. Just grabbed this 17-year-old student, dragged her into a cemetery, and raped her. He also attempted to rape another woman, but she escaped. And after serving his sentence, he'll be deported. Here's the interesting part. When he was asked for a plea, did you do it? And he said, yes, I did that. Why not? Talk about your culture shock. In Berlin, 3 entire streets had to be shut off as fighting migrants basically turned the area into a battlefield. And it all started with these 2 women in their 20s started fighting, and about 50 people chose sides, and it turned into a massive street battle. Apparently, people smugglers are now using high-speed boats to smuggle Albanian illegals over the English Channel. Here in the United States, U.S. officials have arrested an illegal alien for multiple counts of rape after he tried to gain entry to the United States with a child he claimed was his daughter. And she wasn't. He was just bringing her along, and he was raping her. And this is a big issue over this reunification that the liberals are screaming about. A lot of these children being brought in by the illegals are not, in fact, their children. They're biological children. And apparently the rape victim's mother was assured by this illegal immigrant he was going to get her into the U.S. and secure for her employment. So it is a mess down there. It's time to put a stop to it. And we don't need the wall. We just need to actually enforce Title VIII. Enforce Title VIII. That's it. Now, all of this leads up to this British independent member of the European Parliament, Janice Atkinson, basically came on out with a comment I think we all need to remember. If we import the third world, we get third world problems, and that is exactly what is going on across Europe and here in America. But the open borders people are still at it, and believe it or not, there is a new production of The Diary of Anne Frank at the Dory Theater in Los Angeles. And it has been changed Instead of Nazis hunting Jews, it's immigration and customs enforcement hunting the illegal immigrants. So they're trying to equate ICE with the Nazis. It's amazing here. Okay, as you know, over in France, Macron is enduring a bit of a firestorm over this scandal with his former bodyguard and possible lover, Alexandre Benalla. In fact, Macron just canceled a visit that was planned for him to go to Israel, and they think it may be because of this. And now, of course, Macron and Benalla are out there saying that, oh, this is Russia. Russia's the only one who's keeping the story, alive in the media. Their Russian bots are out there just posting about this like crazy. So whatever happens, blame Russia. Russia's to blame for Hurricane Harvey. Little interesting statistic you might want to keep in mind here. Last year, law enforcement using civil forfeiture stole more from the American people than the burglars did. Now, there is a video. This was all caught on video coming out of the Free Thought Project here. And last year, this Armando Frank was sitting on his tractor when he was approached by police who were going to serve him a warrant for alleged trespassing. Frank asked to see the warrant, which is his right. The cops did not produce the warrant. They instead grabbed him, tasered him, choked him, pulled him off the tractor, and in the process, he died. And in the attack caught on video, never once did Frank try and hurt the officers. Now, the police body camera shows within just a few moments of confronting Frank, the officers grow agitated at his passive resistance. And Frank is merely asking to see the warrant the officers claim to have. But they do not produce it, nor did they give him any reason for the arrest. So it really is getting crazy out there. Anyway, they're all being sued. The three police are being sued by Frank's estate. Now, here's where PC is starting to really unravel here a little bit. Over at Harvard, they're having a policy of inclusivity, which has basically told that the sororities and the fraternities have to allow in members of the opposite gender so that they're inclusive, so we can provide this wonderfully inclusive environment here. And actually, it's Harvard College seeks to build a community in which every student can thrive, and it does so on the foundation of a set of shared values, including belonging, inclusion, and non-discrimination. Well, what happened is this one sorority, the Delta Gamma sorority, just quit. They said, no, we're not going to let men come on in here, and we would rather just end the sorority and let it go. It really is getting silly. The whole reason for having single-sex fraternities and sororities is mainly about, protecting the privacy, because it functions as their home, and sort of trying to minimize the amount of unwanted pregnancies that are going to occur. But it really is, our culture has just become so decadent right now. All right, so let's talk about Alex Jones, and let's talk about this assault. Oh, wait a minute. We got a caller waiting on the line. Chris in Las Vegas. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, in reference to your story about the asset forfeiture, I have to point out that many times the police now, anytime that you challenge their authority, demand they produce the warrant or knowledge of a felony crime they allege you committed, they're perverting it and twisting that into resisting an arrest, which is an extreme perversion of the concept that we all have a right, in fact, a duty to qualify what the basis for the encounter, the inquisition, the cross-examination, or the arrest supposedly is, to prove they have the authority to do what they're doing.
Well, there's another possibility.
On this recently.
There's another possibility. The cops wanted to find a reason to seize the tractor through civil forfeiture, and it just got out of control.
Well, in fact, I've had a $50,000 collector car of limited production,
okay.
only 671.
Chris, stay on the line. Got to put you on hold. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And it's time for us to talk about what's going on with Facebook and Alex Jones, InfoWars. And again, there's a double standard at work here. Facebook has banned InfoWars, but they've kept Antifa and Louis Farrakhan. And Facebook can't even explain. Oh, okay. Chris dropped. All right. Sorry about that. I'm trying to get to the top of the hour before our guest comes on the air. All right. So far, the following companies have declared war on free speech: Facebook, YouTube, Apple through iTunes, Google Podcast, Spotify, TuneIn, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, AudioBoom, Pinterest, MailChimp, Stitcher, Disqus, Sprout Social, LinkedIn, and YouPorn, which that's kind of weird, I think. And Vox is now pushing for the ban of harmful and extreme creators. And now pressure is being brought to bear on Periscope to drop InfoWars. This is all-out war. It validates his motto. There's a war on for your minds. And up until now, it's been covert, but now it's broken out into the open, and everybody can see what's happening. And you, our listeners, need to make a point of showing this to everybody that you can, that the liberal Democrats are basically trying to shut down conservative commenting on the internet. This is an attack on freedom of speech. It's an attack on the First Amendment. Okay, apparently Twitter has now killed off U.S. State Department Iraq War whistleblower Peter Van Buren and the last 7 years of his tweets. It's just all gone. It's all gone here. Now, Twitter is saying they have not banned Alex Jones and InfoWars because technically they haven't broken the rules yet, but that if they do break the rules, they'll be gone. Now, over at MSNBC, Stephanie Ruhle is calling on Twitter to ban Donald Trump. Now, that is very much over the top here. So, Northern Truth Seekers blog has been taken down. And it's just out of control. This really is an attack on us. And it's a shame. It really is a shame. And it shows just how far our society is broken here. Journalist Tim Pool is out there saying we've handed over the public square to private companies, and these companies can now decide who gets to participate in political debate. And that's a very, very dangerous situation because they're stifling conservative discussion. We'll be right back with our guest after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And joining us on Skype is Alan Phillips, who's an attorney. And he's in a little bit of a trouble because apparently for his support for parents who do not want to vaccinate their children. And Alan, thank you for spending time with us today.
Well, it's my great pleasure and honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, why don't you just go ahead and tell our listeners your story from beginning to end?
Sure, there are several parts to it. If I may, let me give you just a couple of quick pieces of information about why people might question the status quo with vaccines. I got interested in the issue 24 years ago when my oldest son was born and have been doing research ever since. But for example, we have in the United States, a vaccine injury compensation program. If somebody's injured or killed by a vaccine, you can't sue the manufacturer. You've got to go to a federal government program. And that program has paid out almost $4 billion now because of people injured and killed by vaccines. And like many things I'm sure that you talk about all the time, you'll never hear about that on mainstream media. But the more disturbing part is that our own federal government, Department of Health and Human Services, has a report that says more than 99% of the vaccine adverse events never get reported. So we don't know, we don't have any data telling us what the real extent and harm of vaccine injuries and deaths is. We know they occur because our government pays out money for them, but that $4 billion might represent $400 billion or more if 99%, more than 99% of the vaccine adverse events that occur never even get reported. So if somebody says, well, yeah, there's the occasional, problem with vaccines, but look at all the people who are saved, there's clearly a net benefit. We don't have any data available to make that calculation. We can't determine if there's a net benefit if most of the harm from vaccines, the overwhelming majority of it, isn't even documented anywhere. So there's serious problems with the issue. You really don't have to go any farther than that to recognize that there's a problem. And I would say that there's simply volumes of information from credible mainstream sources that call into question the safety and effectiveness of vaccines, and what are we doing with vaccines, and is it really something that makes sense beyond being a highly profitable medical treatment for the pharmaceutical industry?
Well,
but in terms of,
I was going to say, sorry for interrupting, but you hit on the other side of the coin there. We know about the adverse events, and I think a lot of them aren't reported because people may not realize that what they're experiencing is connected to the vaccine. It's only in the case of the vaccine is administered and there's an immediate reaction that people will make that connection. If the adverse event happens months or years later, they're not going to make that connection. I read an article, I think it was just in the last 2 days, how a research program in Europe has found that girls being given the HPV vaccine are more likely to get HPV than the girls who didn't get the vaccine. And we've had a problem with vaccines, especially those using attenuated live pathogens, that will basically revert to full potency following administration. And we're always seeing these headlines in the newspaper about, there's a measles or mumps outbreak here, get your vaccination. And then we find out that everybody who came down with measles or mumps had been vaccinated.
Yeah, that's a real common occurrence, is well documented in a lot of situations. Measles in particular, back in the 1980s, there was a series of well-documented instances of measles outbreaks occurring in highly and even fully vaccinated populations. And there was actually a study done, it's called a meta-study, looking collectively at the studies where outbreaks occurred in highly vaccinated populations. And the meta-study concluded that as immunization rates rise, measles becomes a disease of vaccinated people. So there's sort of a formal peer-reviewed published medical study just sort of encapsulating what you say has been observed and documented, not just with measles, but some of the other diseases as well. So lots of good reasons are out there, and we could go on for hours on that topic. But with your permission, I want to sort of steer back away from that then to what's going on with me in my situation currently. In terms of legal practice, there are two broad areas that concern vaccines, and one is the attorneys, roughly 130 of them around the country, who do vaccine injury cases. If somebody believes that they or a loved one has been injured or killed by a vaccine, you can't sue the manufacturer. You've got to go to this federal program. And, a shame that we need attorneys who practice in that area, but a blessing that we have them. Some 30 to 50 of them, it's either all that they do in their practice or a strong primary focus and then others where it's part of a broader practice. Maybe they do other forms of personal injury cases or other practice areas. The other broad practice area is what I do. I'm not involved. I have a basic working knowledge of the injury compensation program and system, but it's not part of my practice area. I do exemptions and waivers and work with legislative activism, and I am literally the only attorney in the country who does what I do, at least anywhere near the level that I'm doing it. The only one whose practice is focused solely on that area, the only one who does all the different exemption areas. And let me give you a real quick list. This is not comprehensive, but it's an overview. Because anywhere vaccines are required in the U.S., there could be people who are concerned about getting exemptions or waivers from the required vaccine. So vaccines are required at birth, for school, daycare, and college enrollment, increasingly as a condition of employment. Now, so far in recent years, it's been mostly healthcare workers, but the goal is to have all adults be required to get vaccines throughout our adult life. And if for no other reason, the adult population is about 3 times the size of the childhood population, and so there's a huge undeveloped market there from a pure cold calculating point of view. Mostly healthcare workers, but again, this is a work in progress, and they're going to, if allowed to continue, they will gradually expand to encompass the logical, I don't know if I want to say end result, but let's say future point would be, for example, you can't renew your driver's license unless you have your flu vaccine card, or you can't check out at the grocery store without your vaccine card, or whatever it might be. These are things that are the logical consequence if we keep going the direction we've been going over recent decades and currently. So I work with exemptions and waivers and in all these different areas, also military, immigration, which includes foreign adopted children. I work a lot with family law attorneys around the country, where parents split up and disagree about vaccinating the kids. It turns out that the law in that area with vaccines is completely different from the way the law works with everything else that comes up that parents who divorce or split up disagree about. So there's just a lot of different areas where exemptions and waivers are concerned legally. Many times, for example, school or daycare, all you do is sign a form or write a sentence or whatever. Nobody needs to hire an attorney for that. But many of these areas are more complicated, or different situations come up where people do need an attorney. And so I work with clients and other attorneys and legislators and activists all over the country. And I am under attack now by my own state bar. I am in North Carolina and licensed only in North Carolina. Attorneys are all licensed in 1 or more states or territories. There's no such thing as a federal law license. We can all practice federal law, and that's what enables me to work with clients around the country. As long as I'm only advising about federal law, I can do that. If state law is involved, we pull in a local attorney so they have somebody with the necessary license. But one way or the other, I can and on a regular basis do work with clients, and sometimes clients and attorneys around the country, and the only one who does all these different practice areas. So I have only one piece of a very large puzzle, but a piece that at least some parts of which I'm the only one that has the piece. So my state bar has literally made up facts and law to build a case against me with what can only be reasonably interpreted as a predetermined goal of taking my license. Now, they're not coming right out and saying, we don't like that you help people legally avoid vaccines, but North Carolina is known in the pharmaceutical world as Vaccine Central. We have 4 of the 5 biggest vaccine manufacturers here. There are several states, at least a few, if not several states, that have a strong pharmaceutical presence, and North Carolina is one of them. But we're probably the primary or top vaccine manufacturing state in the country. And I imagine it could be a little bit of an embarrassment to people in the pharmaceutical world or people in the mainstream vaccine world that the only attorney in the country who does what I do happens to be in one of, if not the top vaccine manufacturing states here. So I don't think it's a huge leap to say that they're coming after me because of what I do. But to be perfectly technical or honest about it, that's an educated guess on my part, but a very reasonable one.
It does sound like it, and we know that in America right now, they're keeping the economy going along by just forcing you to buy more and more things that you may not need or want. And certainly vaccines are one of them. I remember when I was a kid, there was only one vaccine that was for polio. And now it's something like the CDC is recommending something like 33, 34 mandatory vaccines for young children. And the CDC itself, of course, is a vaccine company. They own the patents on something like 22 different vaccines from which they're making billions and billions of dollars. So, yeah, they're basically pushing to have vaccines mandatory for every single American in order to basically bring in more money. And because they are indemnified from civil litigation for harm that their vaccines cause, they don't have an incentive to really make sure that the vaccines are being safe and effective. In fact, I read another report that says this year's flu vaccine is totally ineffective against influenza A. And each year's flu vaccine, it's basically a guess as to what flu strains are going to be out there. And again, there's been this huge hue and cry over combined vaccines like the MMR, because nobody's ever done a study as to how those adjuvants are going to interact with each other when they're all mixed together. And we know the adjuvants themselves are a big problem. Ever since they started using peanut oil as an adjuvant, peanut anaphylaxis has just skyrocketed in this country. And it's because during that vaccine process, the body is building antibodies to everything that's in the vaccine, including the peanut oil. And when you're exposed to anything in peanuts, it can actually be fatal, and that's why so many products now carry warning labels. This product was assembled on machinery that may have been in contact with peanuts. And to me, that doesn't look like a solution. I think, basically finding out what's causing the peanut anaphylaxis and taking it out of our medications would be the definite way to go. We know that autism has skyrocketed along with the number of mandatory vaccines that are out there. We know that the CDC issued a report claiming to disprove a link between vaccines and autism, and then the lead author of that report came on out admitting the report was a hoax. That they cherry-picked the data to come up with a report from the CDC that basically exonerated the vaccine industry. So it's turned into a racket, and it's a hugely, hugely profitable one. And the people who are basically running this thing and profiting from it don't care if children are being made ill. They don't care if children are being made autistic. But somebody needs to look at the increasing rates of autistic children and understand we're approaching a point where the cost of taking care of these autistic people could basically bankrupt the nation.
We will fall apart if something, we've been watching the increasing autism rates, and they've shown no sign over the years of leveling off, but it's increasing year to year. And if it continues and I've heard different numbers, but somewhere around the late 2020s, 2030, early 2030s, every other child would be autistic. Now, all of these autistic children grow up, and then they have to be taken care of as adults. I don't think we're going to last that long. I think we will collapse as a society, at least as we see, know, and understand it today, because there won't be enough people available, enough money and resources to care for all of these sick and injured people. And the CDC, we have a federal congressman, Bill Posey in Florida, who has thousands of CDC research documents leaked to him by a whistleblower, proving that not only that the CDC has known for years that vaccines cause autism, but a group of high-level CDC officials got together and deliberately destroyed the research documents to cover that up. And one of these people had a conscience and saw that coming and made copies that ended up with Representative Posey. But he's, for at least 3 years now, has been asking Congress to investigate, and nobody will touch it. That speaks volumes right there about who's really running the country. You know, as the health
country, money's running the country. And by the way,
Yeah.
I think the collapse has already started. You know, looking at what's going on with this panic reaction of attacking the independent media, I think the collapse has already started.
Yeah, ironically, and perhaps ultimately in the favor of truth, is that as more people wake up, whether you're talking about the vaccine issue or some of the other things I heard you talking about, you know, at the end of the last segment, and any of a number of other, you know, big controversies of our day, as more and more people figure out what's going on, and I see that that is indeed what's happening with the vaccine issue, despite the fact there's incredible amounts of money and the quote-unquote authorities all on board with the status quo. It's amazing to me that more and more people are waking up despite that. But as that occurs, they have to go to more extreme rhetoric, more extreme ideas, more extreme measures to try and keep a lid on it. And as they go to more extreme efforts, it becomes more and more obvious that they're trying to hide something. And so ironically, I think they are going to help us to expose themselves by their, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say they're in desperation mode, but they're moving in that direction because the awakening continues to happen with vaccines and beyond. And so I am cautiously encouraged when I see that.
Well, unfortunately, the awakening is taking place in part because of the independent media's reporting. And that's why this attempt to shut down Alex Jones and all these other people, and eventually yours truly, is so troubling, because it isn't just the Democrats who want the independent media to go away. It is the vaccine manufacturers, it's the GMO people, it's corporate media. They just want their competition to go away, and they literally have declared war on the independent media right now. And we have an important function to serve, which is to keep the debate going, because you can't have democracy when there's only one voice being heard.
Right. Well, I guess the question is, as they shut more and more of us down, do people tolerate that or protest in some way? You know, one of the things I've said is I've never been opposed to the truth coming out in the mainstream media, but neither am I holding my breath waiting for that to happen. We should really just nourish the alternative media, as more and more people have been going to the alternative media anyway, and that will become the new mainstream media. But of course, if they successfully shut it down, that may not occur. So it's going to be, this is a real interesting time here. It's going to be real interesting to see how things play out.
Well, it is a very, very interesting time here, and I don't think they're going to succeed in shutting down the independent media. They may change its form, because already we're seeing all of these new startup social media platforms. They're taking off, and we just have to get more and more people to leave off these censored platforms and go where the discussions are definitely going to be free and open. Anyway, Alan, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back in 3 minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Alan, we have a caller on the line that wants to ask you something. So Chris in Tampa, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you, Alan. Yeah, I've been keeping track of what's going on with you and support you with your appearances on various other talk shows. Well, you mentioned Florida Representative Bill Posey, and he has read twice into the congressional record, last time I checked, the testimony of CDC Dr. Whistleblower William Thompson, as that was covered in the documentary Vax from Cover-Up to Catastrophe. So since he's been given immunity, Dr. Thompson's been given immunity, there's been a call that he should be testifying. You know, Congress ought to hold hearings. And since Dr. Thompson has immunity against self-incrimination, you know, even if he incriminates himself, he won't be, he's immune from any incriminating information he might give, as he already has been documented to have given so much incriminating information, admitting to covering up the connection between autism and black boys on the CDC recommended schedule. You know, it's up to 2.36 times. I've heard other figures, but I know that's what's in Vax, the documentary. So I wanted to bring out that point that Dr. Thompson ought to be subpoenaed, and anybody else ought to be subpoenaed, like Dr. Brian Hooker, his colleague at CDC, who recorded him legally, ought to all be, and others perhaps subpoenaed. Others at the CDC ought to be subpoenaed and get to the bottom of the vaccine safety issue.
Well, I agree with you completely. I'll give you my sort of unprofessional take on it. I'm a little bit outside of my area of expertise here, but it looks to me like there's got to be some swamp draining that takes place first before we'll be able to proceed with prosecuting the CDC criminals. We've got to get the people, we've got to have people in the Department of Justice that will actually do their job, that will actually prosecute criminals. We don't have that really going on right now with some of the major, as far as I'm concerned, already well established criminal behavior by people within top agencies in the federal government, the agencies themselves. There's some clearing out that has to happen first before there would be somebody there who would allow a prosecution against CDC criminals to occur and proceed, at least in any legitimate way. So, you know, I think we're moving in the right direction with that, but some steps definitely have to take place first that haven't taken place. So that's just sort of my kind of quick take on it. Clearly, the evidence is there to prosecute these folks at the CDC. Clearly, anybody who would deliberately cover up information about something that is causing avoidable harm to innocent babies and children is somebody who needs to be held accountable for that. But how you get someone to go through the steps to do that when you have a system that is, despite there being good people everywhere, there are good people in the system, but many of the people in the controlling decision-making positions, I believe, are part of a criminal network, a system that protects itself. If you're a member of that system, the laws don't apply to you. You can do whatever you want and nothing will happen. Look at what's going on in Washington and in any alternative media setting, and you'll see a lot of what's going on there in that regard. And so whether it's Trump draining the swamp or something else, something has got to disable that that current system that controls things, that does whatever they want to do, that invents. You know, I'm dealing with a smaller version of that. What's going on with me with the North Carolina bar? There's a small group of people there to whom the laws don't apply. They can do whatever they want, legal or not, and nothing happens to them. And they can go after anybody they want to go after, whether they've done anything wrong or not. And what's interesting, one of the many interesting points about my own current situation is that I did a little investigating of my own, and I have found several other North Carolina attorneys who are either currently dealing with disciplinary proceedings with the North Carolina bar or who have already been disbarred, but several who say, yeah, the bar made up facts with me too. When I say the bar, I mean attorneys who are employed in Raleigh, North Carolina that work for the bar and handle various things concerned with that bar, the bar as an organization. They have, I don't know, maybe 60, 70 employees there in Raleigh at the bar, and I think 17 of them are full-time attorneys that do various things, including investigate complaints against other attorneys. And it's really interesting. I have filed a complaint against the attorneys at the bar who I have proof that they've made up facts of law.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with attorney Alan Phillips and also Chris in Tampa. And I'd like to insert a comment here regarding Chris's question. The problem is the pharmaceutical companies are very, very wealthy, and they use that money. They're very generous campaign contributors. Corporate media will never report on anything wrong with the medical industrial complex because they're dependent on all those pharmaceutical commercials. And the pharmacy companies do a lot of advertising on TV. which is rather interesting. The United States is one of only 3 countries on Earth that allow the advertising prescription medication. Again, it's just all about maximizing profit and churning it out. Congress is not going to investigate anything because they don't want to risk the potential for, losing donations from big pharma, as it were. In fact, some years ago, because of public pressure, there had been a congressional hearing on the possible link between prescription antidepressants and violent behavior. But in the end, they didn't do anything. Because, again, the money is what controls this nation.
There was actually a study recently came out of Princeton University looking at the influence or lack thereof that individuals have at the federal level, and they concluded that the individual people have zero influence. Again, just sort of corroborating what you're saying, Mike, that it's, he who has the money makes the rules.
And we've clearly descended into corporatism, or as Mussolini would have called it, fascism, where, the line between corporate interest and government is blurred, and they're aligned together against the general population. From their point of view, we're just here to provide them with wealth and brand new workers and brand new soldiers. Chris, you got anything you want to add?
Yeah, what you're saying, Alan, and Mike is proved out by the fact that Jeff Sessions so anti-cannabis. He thinks he can put the genie back in the bottle even after so much benefit economically, ecologically, and personally health-wise that people have experienced. He's not going to be able to. And RFK Jr. said a couple weeks ago, I know I told you this, Mike, already, that on the Del Bigtree show, Highwire, a couple weeks ago, RFK Jr. said that immediately after RFK Jr. had said that he had been selected for the first of its kind Vaccine Safety Commission, that he then lost all contact with Trump. So apparently, if that's true, then Trump was just using RFK Jr. as a mouthpiece to inspire confidence in the folks that we would have some review of vaccine safety. So I know I don't have much hope in the federal level either, but I guess they're just so brazenly letting us know that too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna. Maybe I'm naive with this next comment, Chris, but I think it's premature to come to that conclusion. I had that similar exchange in a group that RFK was a part of, and he expressed no confidence in Trump on the same issue that you're talking about here. And I think there's got to be some more clearing before we can even get to that issue. I don't know if that's what's going on with Trump, but I don't think we can get to the issue yet until there's some more clearing that creates a space for this to be looked at. But if he attempted to go forward with it right now, the backlash from the pharmaceutical industry would be enormous. But if we have first a situation where we, for example, do successfully prosecute CDC criminals, then there's going to be a huge clearing and little to no backlash when somebody is looking at vaccine safety in a broader way. So I don't know. I hope I'm correct that it's not something that was set up either for false pretenses or even if sincere was abandoned, because that's a lot of people are putting those one or both of those interpretations on it. But I'm a little more cautious. I think it's premature to judge yet. I think we got a couple more years in this first 4-year session with Trump, and we'll see how far he gets with some of these other things and see if there isn't a clearing that ends up being created where we then have the space to go forward with the Vaccine Safety Commission. I'm hoping that's what the deal is.
Yeah, there's one other aspect, and that may be that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is actually making great progress, but obviously he's not going to be reported on by the corporate media. The corporate media doesn't want America to even know that there's a Vaccine Safety Commission. Because even just the awareness that somebody like Robert Kennedy Jr. Is concerned about that's going to give a lot of Americans pause right now. But a lot of Americans are very concerned about vaccines, and so inevitably, as you would see in a fascist government, the choice to vaccinate or not vaccinate is taken away from us. And we're simply told, you will vaccinate your children. You will buy all this medication and pump it into your child's arm and just keep the money flowing to the big pharmaceutical corporations. What started supposedly as a genuine means of providing health or preventing disease has descended into a flat-out racket.
Well, that's good strategy, Alan, to give credence and believe in the sincerity of your adversary, in this case, apparently Trump. Even when you personally may not believe they're sincere, you can pretend and act as if they are, sending the olive branch and saying if they can come through, give them maybe 3 strikes, and then see what the deal is. But yeah, it'd be nice if somebody maybe at a press conference on Twitter or some other way could raise the issue. Ask him where, you've been elected now for 2 years now. We've been waiting to hear some news on what you promised us. So,
I thought I thought that Trump was going to be very sincere.
He has a long list of accomplishments that no other presidents have ever matched, and he's not even 2 years into his first term. So, the one, in sort of general terms, the one thing that he's done that is just unheard of in politics is that he's made promises that he's actually followed through on, rather than just to get elected in the first place. That is amazing. And I've never been a Republican. I'm not a Republican now. But I'm very impressed with the list of accomplishments. But you got to get into the alternative media to see what those accomplishments are, and not only that he's made good on a lot of his promises, but done so despite the most aggressive backlash probably that any president, at least in modern times, has ever dealt with. But Mike, if we could, I'd like to swing back around to what's going on with my bar situation, because I didn't mention that looking for sympathy because I'm under attack. I mentioned it because there are some things that your listeners can do to help with the situation. And I wanted to help them understand why this issue is important to all of us in the country who have any concern about the right to make your own informed choice about healthcare generally or vaccines in particular, and then what people can do in a very specific way to assist with this situation. Because being the only attorney in the country who does what I do, if I get taken out, not only is there no one to step into my shoes, but even if there was, they wouldn't dare do so because they would be next on the target list. So I do something, as I keep saying, no other attorney does, and so there isn't someone else to step in and take my place. And so the larger part of what I do is actually not legal practice in the sense of billing clients and providing legal services, though I certainly do that, working in all the different exemption areas I mentioned earlier. Most of my work is volunteer activism work. I do radio shows like I'm doing right now, have done my own radio shows in the past, intend to get a podcast back up and running again of my own soon. But do conference presentations, talk with people on the phone or through emails, all kinds of things. Probably a good 85% of my time is not billable time, because when I discovered this vaccine issue, I became very concerned, very alarmed. I'm passionate about the issue. That's the reason I went back to school after 17 years and picked law school, was because of the vaccine issue. So I'm only one of many people who have important roles in the controversy, but I have a unique one. And so I am now being targeted by the North Carolina State Bar, probably because of what I do, and in any event, in what can only be described or interpreted as a plan from the start to take my license. And there are several parts and pieces to this, but let me give, if I may, please, just a couple of quick overview points and tell people where they can go for more information, and then happy to talk about any of the details if you'd like. But involved in this are a couple of different investigations where a person who is now widely regarded throughout the alternative vaccine community as a troll made a couple of false complaints against me to the North Carolina bar. And from that person's perspective, just happened to hit pay dirt because it turns out there was already a corrupt group of attorneys there at the North Carolina bar who have, not only with me now and recently, but in the past, invented facts, used those invented facts to build cases against attorneys, ultimately, in some cases, leading to their disbarment. And I've not only talked to other attorney victims, but I've talked to a couple of what I'll just call insiders for their protection, people who have been in a position to observe this, not from the position themselves of being a victim. So they were looking at this objectively, and they have said to me privately, of course, yes, Alan, there is a problem here. This, what you're experiencing goes on here. So I've heard it from other victims, from insiders, and I'm persuaded, and seen it, of course, in my own situation, there are some corrupt people at the bar that are destroying attorneys' lives. And in my case, the risk is to the alternative health community that we lose a one-of-a-kind resource that, if you don't mind me blowing my own horn, is a valuable resource for the broader vaccine, alternative vaccine community. So normally, when they do investigations, somebody complains about an attorney, if they investigate, these are purely or solely administrative proceedings. They never see the inside of a courtroom. But bizarrely, the North Carolina bar is now suing me. They filed a lawsuit against me. And in the underlying administrative proceeding, they were asking me to turn over client files. They want to dig around through my client files and see if I'm doing anything wrong. Well, this is actually illegal. You can't do that. This is an actual legal term. It's called a fishing expedition, and you cannot require someone to hand over information and documents so you can dig around and see if there's a problem. So the whole proceeding is illegal from the start, as far as I'm concerned. North Carolina law says there has to be an allegation of misconduct. There has to be somebody saying you did something wrong. Even if it ultimately turns out to be false, there still has to be an allegation of misconduct. Well, they're not saying that I did anything wrong, but what they are saying is, well, you work with clients around the country, so you must be doing something wrong somewhere. That's really the message. I'm practicing law without a license in other states, is the concern. But they're not saying I actually did that anywhere. They're saying, in effect, you must be doing it somewhere, so we need to look through your client files to see if you really are doing it somewhere. So it really is as silly as it sounds. But the beauty of this situation is that I don't need people to agree with my side of the story or to believe me. I did the one thing that they actually will tell you not to do, but it really is the right thing to do. I filed a complaint against the attorneys at the bar because I allege they made up facts and law. Now, they can't investigate themselves, of course. And it turns out there are some organizations around the country that have also, and independently of me, filed some complaints against attorneys at the North Carolina bar. And they can't investigate themselves. There's a huge conflict of interest there. But that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying, oh, well, no, nobody gets to investigate us, but we get to investigate you. And these people are attorneys just like me. You know, they shouldn't be above the law. They're not supposed to be above the law, and they certainly cannot legally decide whether or not there's going to be an investigation of themselves. This would have to be conducted by some sort of independent outside committee or some independent parallel process.
Well, good luck on that one. And if you don't mind, we've got another caller on the line who wants to ask you a question. So let's go to Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, first off, I want to make sure that we have a website, a GoFundMe or something so that we can, aid this man in his battle against what's been going on so that, us little money can fight the big money. That's number one. I want to make sure, Mike, please make sure that we have a way to help this man, because I'm just a working guy, but I got $100 right now for this. But now my point. do you think, sir, that the Trump administration is any better than any other administration that we have had as far as the medical industrial complex?
I've seen mixed actions in regard to that. And again, this is kind of outside of my area of expertise, so I'll just, comment informally on this. But I've seen him do things where he seemed to be taking on the pharmaceutical industry. I've seen him do other things. It seemed like he was aligning with them. And I can't really tell, but I would, again, I urge people to be cautious about drawing conclusions in this arena, maybe with some of the other things as well, because I think there has to be a foundation laid for certain kinds of progress to occur. And I think we're still in, with regard to some issues, we're still in the foundation laying stage. So I'm not ready to condemn him for not doing already what I wish he would have done, for example, with the vaccine issue, the Safety Commission, or even other things for the pharmaceutical industry. I think we're in a time period where a lot of corruption is beginning to be exposed, but just the exposure in and of itself, until it happens, and this is a great segue into the first part of your first comment, because the way you deal with corruption is you expose it.
Alan, I'm sorry, we have to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today. And Alan, now's the time. Do you have a website?
Yes, vaccinerights.com. Vaccinerights.com. And on the home page, there's a link near the upper right that refers to a North Carolina bar witch hunt. And that page describes the story, and there are links there where people can sign a petition. If they feel so moved, can contribute to a legal defense fund, which is not only going to help me with this lawsuit against the bar, but there is a group of about 270 of my clients from all over the country that have come together as a group who are about to hire their own legal counsel and intervene into the lawsuit. And by intervene, that means they become a party in the lawsuit. The bar is looking for an order for me to hand over years of client files, which breaches this huge fundamental principle of law called attorney-client privilege, this private information. As I said, they're not even accusing me of doing anything wrong, which is required to do an investigation in the first place. But they're not only doing the investigation, now they filed a lawsuit. And the solution here, you said, and with good reason, good luck on getting these people to cooperate with an investigation against themselves. Well, of course, they're not going to ever do that. But if we put a spotlight on this, and the spotlight in this case is going to be a combination of several different things. Yes, I have to participate in the lawsuit, because if I don't, I lose by default. But there has to be an out-of-the-box solution. They wouldn't have gone to court with an illegal proceeding unless they knew in advance the judge was just going to rubber stamp their demand. So there are a number of different steps that together are going to be designed and are designed to create a public spotlight on this, under the theory that even a bad person will do the right thing if there's a spotlight on them. So part of the spotlight is petitions. I have one petition for attorneys, another one for everyone else, and the links are in that article at vaccinerights.com. I encourage people to go there. Yes, there are some opportunities for people to contribute financially if they want to. Those funds go to legal defense. Some of that will probably, maybe a lot of it, will go to help the client group get representation. There's even a potential for some other folks to get involved in the lawsuit, and I won't try to explain that further at this point because it's in very early stages, so we don't know if or how that's going to play out. But one way or another, even if I lose the lawsuit, even if they take my license, I am still going to, and have been working and will be working to coordinate and with the help of many, many other people. It's not something I could ever have done by myself or on my own, but to help coordinate and organize people within the alternative health community to be engaged and involved in activities that at the end of the day amount to putting a spotlight on the corruption. Because when there's a bright enough light, when they can no longer stuff it under the rug or hide it, the same is true with the vaccine controversy. When there's a big enough spotlight and nobody can hide from it anymore, then there won't be any choice but for people who have been involved in the corruption to be held accountable.
Okay, well, Alan, we are absolutely out of time. My concern about them wanting all of your client records is, will these people be put under pressure, to get vaccinated or drop their requests for exemptions and things? Anyway, Alan Phillips, attorney, and I've just linked to his website from my website. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you are learning here and share it with everyone that you know. Use email, face-to-face conversation. Stay off the corporate social media. New ones are coming along that we'll be able to use. But for the moment, it's basically back to SneakerNet to get this information out. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.